Let's start. Well, good afternoon or good evening to all of you, depending upon your time zone. I'm Carolyne Wright. I'm here in Seattle, Washington, patching in from traditional Duwamish land. We're here for this is our 12th, West East Poets of the Pandemic and Beyond reading, since they occur every 2 months rather than every week, like some other series we love and are beloved of us. We tend to meet a little less frequently, but quantity over quality, or quality over quantity, I'm not sure which, but I hope we all have a wonderful time today. We have just gone back to daylight savings time here in this state and much of the US. And so that may explain the confusion about time, but we know this is reading number 12. We have 4 wonderful readers today who will be sharing their poetry. We have Yannone Leahy, David Rigsbee, Myra Malkin, and Sean Singer. So I think our other hosts are here: Susana Case, Lynn McGee, and Sandy Yannone. And so we're glad to see everybody here. And as other people arrive, we can begin. So let's see. The first reader will be Anna. And let's see, I believe that Susana, no, it's Lynn who's introducing Anna.
Right. So Yannone Leahy is the editor of TAB, the Journal of Poetry and Poetics at Chapman University, where she also directs the MFA in Creative Writing program. Her scholarship around teaching, and she's a poet, and she's a very active teacher of poetry, who has contributed a lot to the field of the teaching of poetry. And her scholarship in that area liberates conversations about revision, imagination, and the workshop experience. She edited a book in the new Writing Viewpoint series, what we talk about when we talk about creative writing, with essays by teacher writers that you might know, like Nicole Cooley and others. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed looking at a lot of her scholarship about teaching is that insight into her own writing process is always at the heart of that work. She said she finds inspiration in all types of areas, from the metaphors of physics to scientific processes. And that's why I think I'm drawn to the work of Yannone Leahy, because I'm a poet obsessed with evolution, adaptation, and the disruption of cruelty. And in tangential ways, her science-based, evidence-based poems kind of help unlock those areas. There's also a lot to be impressed by the sound of the work of Yannone Leahy. She doesn't shy away from juxtapositions that might be a mouthful if they weren't so artfully kind of woven together. Like, she might put words together like armament and omnipotent, in this to each other, and it's so smooth and so beautiful. That's from a poem called On the Role of the Atom, ATOM, referring to her book Tumor, which is part of the Object Lessons series of books about cultural and scientific aspects of ordinary things. Yannone Leahy writes that since 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will likely develop cancer, she says, quote, "Tumors have the power to redefine our identities and change how we live and interact with each other and the world around us." And I think, we all know someone who has, if we haven't ourselves, experienced cancer. Her book Constituents of Matter won the Wick Poetry Prize, and her chapbook Sharp Miracles was published by Blue Lyra Press in 2016. Aperture is her book that came out in 2017 from Shearsman Books. And it's about the, what is described as the inner universe of women, from Marie Curie to Esther Williams to the mothers of the characters in The Wizard of Oz. So very, very imaginative license going on. Her most recent publication that you're looking at now, the beautiful chapbook, What Happened Was, just came out from Small Harbor Publishing. And her relationship to the music of words, science, and justice continues in these 10 poems, which are described by Oliver de la Paz as poignant lyrical diadems. What Happened Was written in the wake of Christine Blasey Ford's testimony in the Supreme Court confirmation hearing. Who could forget that? I mean, I think I pushed it out of my mind, but this book really, and it's steeped in the memory of Anita Hill's testimony 30 years before that. And it begins with a focus on Anna Leahy's mother, who was told by a law school dean that she could not attend classes while pregnant. I mean, that is like this far from the menstrual hut, you know, for college students, you know, I mean, that is not far from the menstrual hut. It's so offensive. So anyway, so that's where the book starts. It's a very powerful book. And that's her most recent book. It's said that it's a group of poems. It is said to be a group of poems that speak up and speak back. So, and they do that. So please welcome Anna Leahy. And I will.
Thank you for that introduction. I did not expect such a generous overview of my career. I need to take notes and send this to my dean. Thank you so much for that. And it's a great setup for the poems that I chose to read today, because I changed my mind yesterday and decided to focus on Women's History Month, which is going on right now. So I'm going to read several poems, including that one that opens What Happened Was with my mother's story. And then also I've never read in front of an audience the one that actually quotes Anita Hill and Christine Blasey Ford. So I'll read that one, and then I'll read a few from Aperture. I also really liked that you talked about sound, because that is so important to me as a poet, and you'll hear a lot of repetition, especially in the What Happened Was poems, which repeat that phrase 7 times. And you called the book beautiful, and I just want to say this is the most gorgeous book cover I could have imagined, and it's by artist Stacy Russo. And the cover of Aperture is based on or extracted from a painting by Leah Halloran, my colleague, who works with images and echoes of the images of the women astronomers who did the initial plates that categorize stars in the universe. So I think that the artwork I'm really proud of. So even if you don't like the poems, the artwork is gorgeous. All right, so let me start with What Happened Was My Mother Was Pregnant with Me. And these What Happened Was poems use the title. The first line is also the title. What happened was my mother was pregnant with me. She mapped a way through without stopping. What happened was the dean thought she would stop. The dean wanted her to go away. He expected her to go away. The dean said that she might fall down the stairs. The dean made his secretary call to tell my mother this. He would not tell her himself. She was not worth his time. She was expected to lose her way in this world. What happened was my mother finished a semester late. She wore a graduation robe with 3 velvet stripes on each sleeve. She held my months-old self for a photo, proof this could be done. She passed the bar exam the next year, a year late. What happened was my mother told me that life wasn't fair. My mother wrote fairness into the law for me. What happened was my mother told me that other children needed her as much as I did. My mother had her own white phone on the wall for their emergencies. What happened was my mother knew she didn't have chances others did. My mother knew she had chances others didn't. What happened was I grew up believing in fairness and chance. And my mother literally did write fairness into the law for me because she was a delegate to the Illinois Constitutional Convention and drafted the Equal Rights Amendment that is the law of the land in the state of Illinois, even if it's not on the federal level. All right, here's what happened was cause and effect. And this is the one that quotes Anita Hill and Christine Blasey Ford at the end. What happened was cause and effect, like ripples and dominoes and butterflies. The road to hell was paved with intentions. What happened was forced down the throat of this world where paper never refused ink. Rape was the carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will. This was the definition for 80 years, the definition for my mother's entire lifetime. What happened was I grew up in no means no and a crisis hotline number on the bathroom stall. Silence was not no, maybe could be yes, depending on who said it when in the same old he said, she said story. These were the oldest tricks in the old book. What happened was both roads and tongues can be forked. A person can run out of things to say before a person runs out of road. Rape is the penetration, no matter how slight. Rape is the vagina or anus with any body part or object. Rape is oral penetration by a sex organ. Rape is without the victim's consent. This definition is not as old as the hills, not as tough as old boots, a rock to push uphill to live under. What happened was suddenly yes means yes for anyone's flesh, not only the forcible female. Even yes, yes, yes can be withdrawn suddenly, like any other offer of something worth something to someone, like condolences and olive branches. What happened was sins cast long shadows beyond a doubt, no crime in that, no body. Old dogs and old bottles and old blocks still chipping off. Teasing, offhand comments, isolated incidents, unwelcome advances, something for something, comments and gestures, frequent or severe, hostile or offensive. Anyone might be the shadow of oneself that only the shadow knows. What happened was a hill of beans to die on, a river to ford. I must confess to the world, the course I took seemed the better as well as the easier. No personal vendetta, more comfortable to remain silent. I had to tell the truth. I am terrified. It is my civic duty to tell you what happened. The reality has been far worse than I expected. I have seen my life picked apart. Force of habit is a force to be reckoned with. A mountain made out of molehills takes time, stands the test of it. And now I'll switch over to Aperture, which, as Lynn suggested, is all about the lives of both real and imagined women. And I'll read a couple of poems from a series in the voice of Lizzie Siddle, who, I'll read the first poem in the series, which is called Remembering Ophelia. And you may be familiar with the painting of Ophelia. She's lying in the pond with the lily pads around, and that model was Lizzie Siddle. And so here's a poem that tries to capture her experience of that. And the painting is from 1852. Remembering Ophelia. I made a pretty painting, secured a reputation with Ophelia. The secret is laudanum. the floaty, floaty feeling, and the shiver chill when the fire went out under the tub and left my teeth to clatter. That's what created my pallor, gave the brush its worthy goal. I held my quiet pose, always anxious for verbal intercourse, though not for the real thing. And that's based on the true story of her sitting for the painting, and John Millay put her in a tub and there were heaters underneath, but he took so long to paint her that the heaters went out, and rather than say something, she just stood or stayed still so that he could finish the painting. And then her husband was D.G. Rossetti, the famous pre-Raphaelite poet. And so when Lizzie Siddall died, he was quite distraught. And he was absolutely sure that he was so heartbroken, he could never write poetry again. So he threw all his poems into the casket and they were buried with her. But then shortly thereafter, he changed his mind. And this is a short poem about that. It's called Encore. Can you believe he exhumed me? Not me per se, but the poems he'd buried with me when he thought sorrow could be as powerful as language, only later to discover he was wrong, that sorrow was autumn in the heart and winter threatened to beget spring. And then I think I'll read, do I have time to read 2 more short poems or just one? Okay, I'll read 2 then. This is My Mother's Mermaid. This is from a section about women and water in Aperture. And then I'll read the poem that was published in Poetry Magazine, which picks up on some of the science things that Lynn was talking about. Everybody know who Esther Williams is? She's a movie star from the 1940s who made her career in swimming musicals. Mm-hmm. And she was my mother's favorite movie star. So this is called My Mother's Mermaid, and it's for Esther Williams, circa 1946. She is sequined and slicked down with emeralds in her hair, mouth puckered and wordless red. A wave of her hand and music strikes up. A chorus line loops below, the body in water with so many legs spreading. She dives, sparkles, swims like virtue, crotches like roof beams above. The water rushes her teeth. She rises like a voice from a clear throat, as if passion were technicolor myth, as if the sea were the means for the story I tell, instead of the story itself, the thing that tells me. And then I'll finish with this poem called World of Glass. World of Glass. Birds do not look much like leaves until fluttering leaves look to me like birds, because feathering is metaphor. Shearings are slivers trimmed from glass, and shearlings are sheep just shorn. The meaning is in the action, not in the thing itself. It's the throwing of the stone. The chip makes a waster or cullet something flawed, returned to potential so different than flight. To leaf is to layer in gold. Pages are leafed through, and feather meant flying before it became pen, just as glass was sand before it was glass. Sheets can be paper or they can be glass. And I can be glass, can glass over, and plume is the shape of smoke, of birds, as if etched on air. When the atmosphere cracks, glass is said to weep. No fleece, no feather or leaf, no view through the fire and glaze, flame work, give shape to sand. The birds take their leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was a brilliant reading, and I'm so happy to have heard your work. And our next poet will be David Rigsbee, whom I have the pleasure of introducing, and also the pleasure of knowing for, these several decades. How to begin? As you can see in the bio here, he is the author of at least 11 collections of poems and critical books on Joseph Brodsky and on Carolyne Kaiser. And may I say, he is one of the literary co-executors of Carolyne Kaiser's estate. He has also co-edited an anthology of 20th century Southern poetry called Invited Guest. And he has a translation forthcoming from Salmon Poetry, a press beloved in these parts, a translation of Dante's Paradiso. So that is going to be an amazing. I've read some of it, and it's excellent. John Shardy, watch out. But David is a poet who, as Lynn was saying about Anna, is a teacher and a scholar as well. He has had poetry. He's held fellowships to the American Academy in Rome, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Gerasi Foundation. He's received a Pushcart Prize. And I want to just say, I have known David longer than many poets. Although apparently we met at the Fine Arts Work Center, which was those many decades ago, although I don't recall that. David recalls it, but and I also don't recall the times that we almost connected later in Louisiana and in upstate New York. But I do know that we finally met face to face in 2006 at an event where Alice Quinn, the former poetry series editor of Knopf, and then later the poetry editor for the New Yorker, she was reading from her new book of Elizabeth Bishop's sort of uncollected work. And we met, David and I met at that event and stayed.
Wow,
We
so
bonded from there and stayed in touch.
What's wrong with this woman?
And so we have been in contact since then. We have been colleagues for a year, teaching at the same institution, and we have just stayed in touch, reading each other's work and giving each other a good deal of encouragement. And as Lynn was saying about Anna, what has impressed me about David's work is there's a certain sort of sly conversational quality to it. His poems often start with a sort of a memoir-like anecdote. And then these modulate into very startling reflections, and often with a final image that can rend your heart. And so I thought I would just give you that sense of what to expect as we hear David read his poems. So take it away, David, and so good to have you here.
Thank you, Carolyne. I love you, and I'm always so glad to see you. I recently saw you in the flesh, as they say, when I was out in Seattle back in December, and it was so good to catch up. And we do go back, and I have a great esteem for your work, as you well know. I'm going to read just a few short poems, and my reading is going to be schizophrenic in this sense. I'm going to read from my last actual collection of my work, which was called This Much I Can Tell You, which is published by Black Lawrence, there it is. And after that, I'm going to read you some poems from a recent collection I really sort of put together with my left hand, a bunch of found poems in the voice of, in the actual verbatim, may I say, voice of Donald Trump when he was running for re-election, and called MAGA Sonnets. It was my idea to chop him down to size and put him in some bite-sized poetic form. And I think you'll like them because they're scarily funny, all of them. And I'll read you a few. You'll get a taste of what that's like. But first to me, I'm going to read you, let me see, just a few poems from this much I can tell you. The first one is called Oriole. Let me begin by telling you how the Oriole lit for a moment on the power line as I sat in thought on my balcony perch and fed myself with books, sentence after sentence, above the ground squirrels, above the dogwood's reply to the fleur-de-lis, above the hop and blink that goes by unseen under the leaves. I read word by word, syllable by syllable, letters like wooden Hessians on a calliope lost at sea, on their voyage from the old world, expressionless and yet expressive, sinking in their stiff uniforms, bottle straight, simple. When I looked up, it was gone, the wire still rocking as if it had made a musical note on behalf of its player, a common bird who made his own song in another forest. The next little poem is called Next the Sky, and begins in italics. I don't usually like italics, but this is merely to indicate what someone else is saying to me or thought. Next the sky, think bigger, you said. Think how it looks from roof level. Think next the sky. And so I did. I followed the shrinking figure as it seemed to float down the street and finally turn into a period, waiting, it seemed, to make a telling conclusion, the last bar of an old drinking song, when the men fall silent and look at their hands, having no further use for their amazing instruments. The next poem is called The Takeaway. It was as if a small reckoning had taken place, because I looked down and all I could see was my napkin fallen like a sail over the pontoons of my shoes, pointing in your direction. And when I raised my eyes, there were our plates and scraps, a residual rim of sauce on one like a distant coastline, the other in similar disarray, bones, tomato wheels lying by. I averted my gaze because I knew yours was there, patient, waiting, with that steadfast clarity. And that was the takeaway. So I walked down the street, skirting the river, wind still warm from the finished summer, clouds starting to assemble. Someone passed and I heard, I am of the opinion that. I crossed the street and stepped down the subway stairs like an Academy Award winner who knows to pause after such steps before moving on to the transport in the very place where the actual stops and the symbolic begins. And then this little poem has a story behind it, but the poem will tell you the story. It actually took place, evidently, according to Edmund Keeley, who recently died, alas, the great translator of modern Greek poetry. It's called Composition. And then there was the Greek poet who heard a man had died upstairs in the boarding house where he was drinking. He pleaded with the undertaker to delay removing the body before he had a chance to address it. So insistent was he that he was granted his request and spent the night reading poems over a dead man's body, expecting a resurrection to rival Lazarus. All night long he chanted his best work and finally descended, haggard and dispirited. It is the power of language that it doesn't need to tell you how the story ends. It is the crispness of pine after the air of summer. And finally, from this collection, I'll read you a little poem, a kind of a tableau poem. I think it has some good lines in it. It's called A Breakfast. Daddy is fixing breakfast this morning. Country ham, fried eggs, grits, and red eye. He calls it breakfast of champions. My mother is pinning the wash to the line. I can see her through the window, bending to the basket, standing up, an assembly line. I'm embarrassed at the row of underwear. But why? The neighbors have their lines. An earwig pops out and wiggles across the sill. Then my brother emerges, stands sullen in the doorway before sitting at his place. Not much to say, and yet so much unsaid. So much we bring to the table, its thin white tablecloth that touches our knees as we sit. Before long, we will all be heading out under the crop of our masters. But not this morning. Time has no business here. What the mockingbird can't see as it perches flickering in the bush, neither will it sing as the day brightens, neither will I sink to interpretation who sing and forfeit the dead. Okay, now changing keys completely to our late lamented ex-president. I'll just read you a few, more or less at random. You find these obsessions. As I said, I got the idea by reading the transcripts, which were available after his rallies. They're online. Just go and read them. And it occurred to me that you could cut and paste, and it would have a sonnet. And after a while, I had 75 of them, and they seemed to pick up on themes, and they were quite funny in a scary kind of way. For example, his obsession with the Nobel Prize. He wanted so much to get a Nobel Prize. He thought he should get a Nobel Prize because Obama had it. So there are 4 or 5 poems in this book that deal with his obsession and his wish to be a Nobel laureate. And it gets to the point where he actually tries to make us believe that he did win one, which I found kind of interesting. I won one for that, he says in one. He says, I won 3 of them, and I won one for this and this and this. But the very first one in the series of the Nobel Prize themed sonnets, they look just like that, is the first one. It's just called the Nobel Prize. And this is in his voice, and this is verbatim. I'm going to tell you about the Nobel Peace Prize. I'll tell you about that. I made a deal. I saved a country, and I just heard that the head of that country is now getting the Nobel Peace Prize for saving the country. I said, what? Did I have something to do with it? Yeah, but you know, that's the way it is. As long as we know, that's all that matters. I saved a big war. I've saved a couple of them. They gave one to Obama, and he had no idea why. That was the only thing I agreed with him on. I would get a Nobel Prize for a lot of things if they gave it out fairly, which they don't. You see that, always that tone. There's a poem about that has to do with the Green New Deal, which I rather like, called Wonderful Cows. It's a fun poem, but it's kind of menacing, as you'll see. Joe Biden will give you the single biggest tax hike in the history of our country. He's talking about quadrupling taxes. The Green New Deal, the Green New Deal. no cars, no airplanes, no cows. No cows? You know, whatever happened? Did they ever leave the cows in? I think that they had to take that out, right? Originally, it was no cows. They didn't want to have any cattle or cows, which is pretty brutal when you think about it, right? The Green New Deal, which would crush our farms, destroy our wonderful cows. They want to kill our cows. You know why, right? You know why? Don't say it. They want to kill our cows. That means you're next. So if you thought that was menacing, turns from menacing to creepy when he talks about his daughter Ivanka. Don't you think my daughter is hot? She's hot, right? You know who's one of the great beauties of the world, according to everybody? And I helped create her, Ivanka, my daughter Ivanka. She's 6 feet tall. She's got the best body. Can I ask you something? Is it wrong to be more sexually attracted to your own daughter than your wife? Yeah, she's really something. And what a beauty, that one. If I weren't happily married and, you know, her father, she's actually always been very voluptuous. Would Ivanka posing for Playboy really be disappointing? Not really. She does have a very nice figure. I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. She wanted to take a trip. She said, Dad, can I go with you? She actually said, Daddy, can I go with you? I like that, right? And I'll read you one more from this series called Biker Love. Another kind of love. I don't know why the hell the bikers liked me so much, but they liked me. It might be at 99 to 100%. And no matter where I go, I have these bikes, thousands and thousands of bikes I never saw. And I'd say, come on in. Can you come in? There's no room for them, right? They didn't want to come in. They said, sir, we're not here to listen to you speak. We're here just to protect you. And I felt so safe after these guys, tough guys, definitely tough. They're sitting on those Harleys mostly, I guess, right? That they felt good. But you know, they're going boom, boom, and I never felt safer. It's true. It was just a tremendous love that we had. I can't tell you how much it means to me. They are tremendous people, but that was never my deal, okay? I like the limousine better. I don't know why. Okay, well, it goes on like that. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's an interesting endeavor to try to find the poems in the words of someone who is one of the more unpoetic people on the planet, you know. So
he comes across as a kind of idiot savant too. He thinks he's a genius, but he really is kind of an idiot savant because he's able to be somehow manipulated into this form, you know, that we all love. Although most of us don't write sonnets anymore. But, yeah.
I guess Putin is next, right? We're gonna find.
Well, he sent that to me earlier. Yeah. That's
We're
something
talking about that, but for Putin,
Yeah.
you'd have to take off your shirt to
Yeah.
read. It would have to be that kind of parody, you know. Come in a horse and.
Well, I like the. May I point out the cover is by a wonderful painter named Catherine Whittemore, and she is the daughter of Reed Whittemore, who is a poet laureate in the United States College Library, the Speaker Library, or whatever, the consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress back in the late '60s. And
I remember him. Yeah.
I visited him a couple of times. He had he lived in Washington, in College Park actually, and he drove around in a Checker. It was the biggest car. It used to be the New York City taxis. You know, it's a car that was like 25 feet long. It's a very long car. So you sat in the back seat. You practically needed a amplification to speak to the driver, but he tooled around town. And anyway, Kate is also doing the cover for my translation of the Paradiso.
Oh,
So I'm very grateful to her, and it's a beautiful cover too. But I like this because she picked the orange hair just right, and of course there's the Bible right, upside down. I don't know how we did it. Yeah, and also the obesity and so forth and so on. She's did a fabulous job of that.
So our next poet is Myra Malkin. I've been a fan of Myra's for a very long time. She has been a member of my weekly writing group for about 15 years, and her first her first collection was stunning, and her new collection from Broadstone Books is even more stunning. Myra has an enviable mastery of words. I think of her as a word collector, and she has managed the magic of writing about death and also being funny in a wry kind of way. And I think the best description of the new book I can give you is the one I wrote when I blurbed the book. So I'm going to read that. Myra Malkin, Sunset Grand Couturier, addresses aging and dying with intelligence and wit. I know, how can these topics be fun? But these, excuse me, but these poems are, and the sly self-deprecations of her, quote, unremodeled self, this, quote, addict of containers who clutches all her notebooks, her darlings to her chest as she's drowning, whose roommate body complains of being colonized, reveal an impressive display of sometimes ekphrastic proficiency of craft. Oh, the images and sounds of Myra's poems you'll reach for the fizz-gigs transfixed flare, the pata-fla-fla gabble. You'll wonder about the hedgehog chandelier, and you won't want to wear the dump glitter of a wealthy woman's jewelry, though you'll think about that jewelry long after. The poetry in Sunset Grand Couturier forces us to acknowledge the grand couturier of metaphorical sunset, but there is nothing sentimental here. Her lines are fresh. Who else would inform us that her widow platter is dishwasher safe, or that her amorous dead is becoming a spirit as perfect as bacon? The dead with their memory switchblades go sit by the door, but what Myra Malkin has done with which to counter that is her, what Myra Malkin has with which to counter that is her words, and they hit the mark with force. So here is Myra Malkin, and you're in for a treat.
Thank you so much, Susana, and thank you, Caroline and Sandy and Lynn. It's wonderful to be reading in this terrific series. The first poem is about a drummer, and it mentions, as Susana mentioned, pataflaflas and flams, which are basic drumming patterns. That's really all I know about drumming. Drummer tuning. The timpanist, that adept of hiatuses, with cashmere taps begets mute booms like ghosts. He has to fine tune his hubbub kettles, the stew meat timbres in them, soft auguries of flams, of pataflafla gabble, plush tattoos. He lays his cheek against the taut drawn skin, as though the endless rests, while violins and trumpets perorate, have magicked him to sleep. But his attentive ear still hearkens to his heavy creatures, hears, as if it were an escrow, their intent, their pent-up spate, their reservoirs of roar. The next poem is about being the descendant of immigrants, and it has a weird little quotation from Henry James in the middle. He came to America in 1904, and he was really taken aback by all the immigrants he saw in New York City. Translated Cossacks. Suppose she happened to be descended from a pariah people, experts at being scapegoats. Cossacks came. They burnt down the house. All night, the family crouched between the corn stalks. Soot flakes grazed them. Relatives took them in. They were beholden. The mother kept nagging, let's go to America. Your uncle went. Suppose the fear got handed down, like a tureen, a jean, a plated pocket watch. In America, they still were aliens, immitigable, the sounds and signs of Jewry that had burst all bounds. Sword slashes they suffered, the triumphs of peers at weddings, the condescension of moneyed cousins, the criticizing eyes of the ensconced. Her parents' wordless prompts. Be inconspicuous, be perfect, be pretty. Can't you be pretty, damn it? She was to certify them, be laissez-passer for them. She was to make a splash that would definitively scatter the cousin competition, but modestly, modestly. Ride high while lying low. Lie low while riding high. No showiness that might provoke the evil eye. No gaffes, no boasts, no overeager fervor. Those footholds for put-downs. But she lacked the knack of it. Muzzled her sumptuous I am, played safe, declawed herself. It doesn't matter now. New Cossacks are here, new kindly ones. Old age, marauding death. Her body is an alien. Public health dream. I dreamt of baobabs. They call them upside down trees. Then the haboob came, a desert dust storm. Walls of sediment rammed me. The sand seemed to guzzle up the air. I dreamt that scurvy politicians, slivers of ice in their hearts, stood on a hillock of mud. They were washing their hands. Lies sallied forth from them as excrement and semen, fibs, half-truths, porkies, alternative facts, a sewage haboob. I hid myself in scotch grass. Meanwhile, the dead piled up. I mean the unrefrigerated dead. People of so-called color, bus drivers, orderlies, firemen, food service workers. The air was like minestrone. Lies filled it. Lies in their aerosol go-karts. The baobabs died. What happened afterward, I can't remember. I drifted away to the empty suburbs of sleep. My daughter lives in Japan, and when she first went to Japan, I thought I should read The Tale of Genji, the great Japanese novel that was written by a woman around the year 1000. I read it, I loved it, but I got very fascinated by the man who did the translation that I read. His name was Edward Seidensticker, and he seems to have been a difficult, rather cantankerous man. For some reason, I started to feel very protective about him. This poem is based on him. It's almost all made up, but there are a couple of first-person passages that I adapted from a book that he wrote about doing his Genji translation. A Genji translator visits an exposition. At the pavilion of the human passions, he ate frites from a paper punnet. He searched for what was covert on celadon saucers, inaudible peonies, ghost shapes. He gazed at altar-calming votive objects. I have understood these last few days why old people kill themselves in spring. To feel life all around you and to feel no life within. pathos of pottery fragments, an ochre stoneware stack of stuck to one another serving dishes. At least I have my Genji to go back to. I swear that I will go back to him tomorrow. At the Pavilion of the Human Passions, a printed label listed 5 desires: sex, food, reputation, property, sleep. He looked for omens. He asked the poem cards to tell his fortune. The good will not be solitary long. When I was a legal services lawyer, my welfare clients were always getting notices telling them that their benefits were going to be discontinued. And so I've stolen that phrase for my title. Notice of discontinuance of benefits. Your roommate body. For years, she partied with you. Suddenly she's sick. She needs new parts, needs scans, needs EKGs. You're good to her. You go to doctors with her. You sit with her at night. She's angry though. She says you colonized her. You were the governor general who trafficked in slaves, who squandered her bauxite, her gold. And now the indigenes rebel. They besiege the capital. They dismantle the collaborative city. The last poem is about Louis McNeice, an Irish poet who was in all the anthologies of my youth, my long ago youth, reading McNeice. Dissolved in the running water of time, we fool our fancy to catch intact what is always in dispersal. Louis McNeice, Departure Platform. Haven't read through the collected poems, but even if I had pencil marked lines I especially liked, world is crazier and more of it than we think. Would I remember those lines? One poet, one collected poems, one life, so much to know about him, to forget. When his mother died, he was 5. He started writing poetry at 7. The party he spent by a mantelpiece, elegant, silent. His host said, "Is it true you were brought up in Belfast at Carrickfergus?" "Yes." "Ah, that confirms a legend I have heard. A long time ago, seals invaded that coast and interbred with the folk there. Even when I copy whole poems into my current notebook, some of them slide from my head like keys from an unzipped purse. I go on doing it though. Those hospitable notebooks, those cabinets of curiosities. It's like somebody taking selfies. Buckingham Palace and me, Louis McNeice and me. Why this compulsion to cull, to salvage sea glass fragments? As if I'm stuffing loot into a too small sack and running from a wreck, though it's I who am going to sink, and all too soon. As I am drowning, I'll wave as well as I can. My darlings clutch to my chest. Thanks so much.
Oh, Myra, Myra, Myra. Seriously, it just, I mean, I'm in the same writing group with Susana and Myra, and I've only been in the writing group for 10 years. I'm the newbie, so I'm still earning my, my membership. And, but I learned so much from I have learned so much from being in a writing group with you. Okay, so let me just screen share. I am so happy to introduce Sean Singer. And Sean, thank you so much for reading for us today. I thought I would ask my friends for their impressions of the work of Sean Singer, because I think, a lot of people are reading Today in the Taxi. And so I reached out to my friend, Jennifer Franklin, and she said that his work is both timely and, I thought you would just be like, I love it, I really love it. But, she's a very smart lady. So she sent me this, that his work is both timely and timeless. It grapples with existential concerns as well as problems of humanity's own making. Sean Singer's work represents Kafka's ideal book. It is an axe for the frozen sea within us. It wakes us up to both the horrors of the world and what makes it worth saving. And you're asking yourself, how does that happen from inside a cab? Well, it does. It happens from inside a cab. You might remember that Sean Singer won the Yale Younger Poets Prize, as well as the Norma Farber First Book Award from the Poetry Society of America for his first book published in 2002, and that was Discography. W.S. Merwin wrote the foreword to that collection, and he said that Sean Singer's inventive language conveys the obsession that is his theme, its sweetness, its momentum, its solitude, its terrors. And there's always that sweetness, that kindness, I should say. Tracy K. Smith, in reference to Sean Singer's poetry collection, Honey and Smoke, which gives an alternative view of historical figures, including Kafka, Freud, Van Gogh, Scott Joplin, and others, said that his pitch perfect ear for verbal music adds a jittery, jazz-inflected, visceral acceleration to the experience of these poems, and that he uses strange facts and an even stranger imaginative lens to expand our understanding of urge, fear, madness, and creativity. So I'm all for strange, I'm all for fear, I'm all for madness, and I'm all for creativity. Today in the Taxi is Sean Singer's third book of poetry. It was just released this year from Tupelo Press. It describes his experiences driving in a taxi in New York City from 2014 through 2020. I am racking my brain wondering if I ever, Susana, you always took the lift, I know, a lot at that time. So he was an independent contractor for Uber, Lyft, Juno, and Via. Each poem describes an actual trip, and there are 3 recurring main characters. And this is kind of the device of the book, which is another interesting thing to really look at as poets. The 3 are the American bassist and composer Charles Mingus, who died in 1979, the German Jewish writer Franz Kafka, who died in 1924, and the Lord, who, depending on your beliefs, has not yet died, who is a female and who has a female voice. So these 3 voices ride alongside the real passengers, and the city is seen through the perspective of the driver. As in Sean's word, he says that their voices provide an ethical GPS. An ethical GPS. Do you wish you had an ethical GPS? I wish I had an ethical GPS. Allowing the reader to bear witness along with the driver. His hope is that the reader, quote, sees the drivers as complex people and not invisible parts of a machine to bring them to their destination. And I would say waitresses too. Waitresses too. See them as complex people and not invisible parts of a machine. This humanizing of the drivers, and it pains me to have to use the word humanizing in reference to humans. You should never have to say humanizing humans, but unfortunately, we do. It's intended to build in the reader an understanding that there are, as Sean Singer describes it, metaphors and poems all around us, even in the most commonplace of mundane exchanges. And it does all of that. Yes to all of that. So please welcome Sean Singer.
Thank you so much. And thanks for your attention. So these are also, these are all prose poems, and they all begin with the same phrase, and they all have those kind of main characters. 1/10. Today in the taxi, I brought a man from Midtown to someplace in Astoria near the airport. He asked me to take him round trip. We got to the address and he waited outside the place and someone came out and handed him a brown paper bag. The man gave the person some cash. Then we left. He asked me to drive him to the E train instead. I don't believe in saints or omens, early winds, or the pink luck of a sunset. I don't see the Lord's love with her incisions and furry ornaments. The vehicle is not just a way to get to the crime, but somehow to bless whatever the journey needs. I use my braking and steering inputs to turn inward, or even to go down the uncertain road. Anti-venom. Today in the taxi, I got a fare from Parkchester to the Bronx Zoo. She finally came out of the building, put her baby in the car seat and said, "I forgot something upstairs." Then she left the baby in the car and went back inside for about 7 or 8 minutes. I couldn't believe it. I'm a safe person to leave a baby with, but she didn't know that. I was nervous. Some people live without contradiction. I remained calm, though the situation was beyond the job description. Don Bias had a serpent's tooth affixed to the octave key of his tenor saxophone. Perhaps it helped him push into the wilderness or to ward off evil. One sunny July, Kafka says he wept over the report of the trial of Marie Abraham, who, because of poverty and hunger, strangled her 9-month-old with a man's tie she used as a garter. Burnt plastic. Today in the taxi, I picked up a Wall Street type on Park Avenue near 48th Street. He was going to Montclair, New Jersey. His house was on fire, and he spent the trip on the phone barking orders at his wife, his roofer, his contractor, his insurance company, and at me. He kept saying, "Go this way," or "Which way are you going?" He said to someone, "There are firearms and ammunition in the house." Periodically, he held back tears. It was a long 25 miles for me, and I suppose longer for him. We got there and the house was burning. The Talmud says, nature rules over all things except the terror it inspires. Days of winter. Today in the taxi, I brought a Chinese couple, parents of a student at Columbia, from Amsterdam Avenue to JFK. The girl was crying and the mother was crying. The parents sat in silence for most of the trip. They didn't speak English and I didn't speak Chinese. I did offer them a little package of tissues. On the other hand, the sun came out and it warmed to 24 degrees. A driver should find a fixed object on a road, such as a sign or a tree, and when the car in front passes it, count 3 seconds before his own car passes it. Then add a second for each hazard, rain or darkness. The road is not unlike a little pressed between vessel that the car pushes along its black bloodstream. A psalm instructs that it will be as it is said. Limbo. Today in the taxi, driving a commercial real estate type from 43rd and Madison to 57th and Park, I said, "Would you prefer to go up Madison or Park?" He said, "It doesn't matter. Either way, we're fucked." And it was true when a black pier of birds burst from the building like fulfillment. I too seek to weave a memory from foam. A black bottle and opener and the blackest bottle and the flow of liquids. You cannot know it, you can see it. General Beadle Smith reported that in April 1945, when they liberated Buchenwald, he witnessed General Eisenhower go to the opposite side of the road and vomit. From a distance, I saw Patton bend over, holding his head with one hand and his abdomen with the other. I too became sick. When the oncoming headlights are too bright, it is said you should look to the other side at the lines on the road. You would stop yourself from being blinded and stop yourself to imagine the road ahead, unstrung, and the rubber against it. Schism. Today in the taxi, a passenger got in and she was crying. I don't know why. We left Astoria for Williamsburg. I gave her a little package of tissues and she went on her way. Kafka said, crying is especially alarming for me. I cannot cry. When other people cry, it seems to me like a strange, incomprehensible natural phenomenon. I thought maybe she was going through a breakup, or perhaps it was a passage in a novel. Some people think of Williamsburg as the hipster apocalypse, and others the orthodox. No, the Lord is there with them. She is pushing a shopping cart full of plastic bottles rescued from trash cans. Crying literally means to ask for loudly. She mumbles through a drop of salt water, but she's really saying, you are worthy of asking and having your question heard. E minor sonata. Today in the taxi driving north on 31st Street in Astoria, a bus went through a red light and nearly killed me and my passenger. Hit with a heavy object, some carry-on with wet fur is misshapen red, part raccoon and washed in road light. If ever there was wanting, you have found it. If something was lost, let it be discovered. Dusk's varnish, please swallow the continent whole. Earlier, my passengers were making out like they were the last people on earth. Simone Weil said, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Uncomfortable. Today in the taxi, bringing a guy from the Upper East Side to Penn Station, we were on Park Avenue. When he rolled down the window and spit just as a food delivery guy on a bicycle was riding by. The bike messenger looked incredulous. The passenger said, my bad, an expression I loathe. The bike messenger looked like, is this actually happening to me? The guy said, none of it got on you. The bike messenger looked like, what the fuck? The guy said, my bad, I didn't see you. Once, an elderly woman remembered Kafka, who had rented a room from her parents in February 1924. The woman, Christine Geyer, said that Kafka, already sick with tuberculosis, was spitting phlegm off the balcony. Didn't he see the children playing below him in the arbor? Empty. Today in the taxi, I got a couple on Lafayette Street going to the Home Depot on West 23rd Street. The woman was about 8 months pregnant. At some point, the man started sobbing. We're in debt every month. We're so close to the edge. I can't do this anymore. The woman said, I'll return it. I had no idea you were this upset. I've never seen you this upset before. The man was hysterically crying. We're in debt every month and it doesn't seem to bother you. You don't care. When we were on 6th Avenue, the woman asked me to pull over and they got out. Poor lovers, one volcano pouring lava from one mouth into one's other till one unravels. Floating. Today in the taxi, I brought the famous jazz drummer's wife, Elena, all around Harlem doing errands. Cobb is the last surviving member of the band that recorded Kind of Blue. We went to the bank and to the pharmacy. She let loose with some stories. It was as if his music was not alone waking up from its dream. I remembered a psychiatrist who said, children wake up in the middle of the night, not to see if you're there, but if they're there. I thought of how his wire brushes made this sound like neither fish nor mammal, but this warm ebbing handling a spine. Pink gloves. Tonight in the taxi, I drove 4 women from a bachelorette party, complete with their tiaras and feathers, to another bar. Already happy, they pushed the bride-to-be forward and she asked me how I thought she looked. I was too taken aback to answer much of anything. She was liquid, prehistoric, and my little body burned. I thought of the Lord throwing handfuls of sequins at the party, as if to say, there is no other life but this one. Verse. Today in the taxi, I picked up a woman with a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, on West 91st Street going to West 68th Street. When they got in, I said, she should wear a seatbelt, please. And she said, seatbelts aren't safe for kids her age. I'm a safe driver, but in a crash, whatever isn't strapped down will continue flying forward at whatever speed the car was traveling. I imagined fears of the apocalypse, yellow ants and bacteria coming from the ice caps. All will suffer. Who knows what danger we may have encountered had they worn seatbelts. Once it was claimed that the prophets can command things not in accord with the law. An old rabbi called it a commandment which is fulfilled by means of a transgression. They opened the door and went on their way. Which seed? Today in the taxi, my passenger was crying into her phone. She just had a miscarriage. Who is she talking to? Her mother, perhaps. She hoped there was an invisible hand that had some purpose in her tragedy. I pictured the Lord and her shelf of jars and vapors, her amino acids and carbons, fit together with one black wheel and one white wheel. Every Sabbath, the rabbi would remove the slip of paper with her name on it from the golem's mouth, and it would become lifeless, nothing but a thimbleful of little clay cells. Thank you.
Why doesn't everyone unmute themselves?
Yes.
Susana's gonna close it out, but
Yeah, that was
great.
fantastic.
Wow.
That was really great.
Very generous with tissues, Sean. Everyone cries.
yeah, it's good you had those little packets of tissue.
I will never take a taxi the same way again.
Yeah.
Right? Oh my gosh.
Can I ask you a quick question? We've taken so much of everyone's time. But can I ask Sean a quick question? Did you, about your process, and you don't have to answer it if it's too invasive, Sean, but did you start with like the pieces? Did you assemble these poems? Like, did you start with the quotes from Carolyne and then assemble them, or how did it happen?
I took little notes when I was actually driving. Well, I had been driving for about 3 years before I wrote anything. But I happened to, for whatever reason, I can remember every person, where they were going, where I picked them up, and details like that. So once I had the what happened, then I was able to make the connections to, the other material.
Mm-hmm. And you were operating, the glue was intuitive, right? It was just intuitive.
Once I figured out the form, I was then able to integrate. For me, finding the right form is almost the whole game even more than the subject matter.
You know, I only know this one book of yours. I think I'm going to get discography now. I'm really curious about that one. But do they have a form too? Do they have a form like this?
That uses a range of different forms depending on the subject matter of the particular poem. So for me, the form kind of grows out of the subject, it's not imposed, you know, from above.
So you're not driving anymore?
No, I stopped when COVID started because it really wasn't safe anymore. So now I have a newsletter called The Sharpener that people subscribe to that has every day I email out, you know, 4 or 5 poems, a range of different poems. And then once a week, I write like a craft essay or I call them writing problems.
Yeah, I saw that. I think I checked it out, and I think I'm going to get some samples and then I'll subscribe. But the poems you put in The Sharpener, are they all your poems?
No, none of them are mine. They're from around the world. What I do is I take an image of a poem as if you're flipping through a book, and often they have relationships to each other somehow. Like you know, I'll have some concept like friendship or you know, mothers or whatever the topic is.
Yeah, and you guys, we have Sean's website posted on the chat column, and if you go to his website and you look at the bottom of the page, you can see the link to The Sharpener, the newsletter that he's talking about. Are you working on another book?
I haven't yet, but you know, hopefully I will.
Yeah.
Does anyone have questions for any of the other readers?
Yeah.
Well, then we want to thank you for coming, and the recording of the reading will be on YouTube shortly. First, because it's on Lynn's computer, then she's got to upload it to her Google Doc, send me the link, and then I'll put it up on YouTube. Our next reading is July 10th, so you might make a note of that, and it'll
Wait.
be announced on.
What about May?
Oh,
May 8th. We have May 8th.
I'm
too.
sorry, I'm
A
in the
week.
wrong part of the year.
We have May 8th, yeah, before the week
Okay,
before
sorry,
Mother's
yes,
Day.
our
Yeah.
next reading is
Sorry,
not in
before
July, our
Mother's
next
Day.
reading is in May. Yes, we have a reading every 2 months, so I managed to skip ahead. Thank you.
I actually have a question. Are any of our poets planning any poems in the voice of Joe Biden, perhaps, or Kamala Harris? This would be a very different discourse. Just out there. Maybe it will lead to something, you know.
Well, now that you put it out there, I'm going to blame you if it happens.
And she'll get you.
The bad guys are always easier.
Yeah.
Or
that's right.
promising.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, should I stop the recording now?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, crap. Where is it?
I think Kamala Harris is more interesting to write about than Joe Biden. I would have trouble writing about Joe Biden because he doesn't come across to me that much in any particular way. And I think if I try to write about Joe Biden, I'd come up with more of a parody of Joe Biden.
You're still recording, Lynn.
Okay.